I've never told anyone this story before. Not my therapist, not my family, not even my closest friends. But it's been eating at me for 3 years now, and I need to get it out. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm not losing my mind. My name is Sarah, and this happened when I was 28. I was going through a messy divorce in San Francisco and needed a fresh start. Portland seemed perfect, artistic, affordable, and far enough away from my ex-husband that I could finally breathe again. I found this Victorian apartment online for half the price of anything comparable. Should have been my first red flag. The building was from 1923, all narrow hallways and creaking floors. The kind of place where you could hear every footstep above you, every door slamming down the hall. When I met the landlord, Mr. Patterson, he seemed nervous, kept checking his watch, avoiding eye contact. When I asked about the previous tenant, he just said she left suddenly and changed the subject. I moved in on a rainy October evening. The apartment was bigger than the photos showed, with high ceilings and original hardwood floors. But there were oddities. Things the previous tenant had left behind. Vintage perfume bottles lined the bathroom shelf, expensive ones, barely used. In the bedroom closet, I found a box of old photographs, black and white pictures of a woman who looked remarkably similar to me. Same dark hair, same build, even the same style of glasses I wore. The strangest discovery was a diary, leather-bound and worn, tucked behind the radiator in the living room. Most of the pages had been torn out, but I could make out fragments of handwriting. She doesn't understand yet. One entry read, "But she will. We're so alike, she and I, almost like we're the same person." That first night, I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate pacing that went on for hours. I assumed it was my upstairs neighbor having trouble sleeping. The next morning, I ran into Mrs. Chen from down the hall. When I mentioned the noise, she gave me a strange look. "Honey," she said, "that apartment's been empty for 8 months." Ever since. She trailed off, but I pressed her. That's when I learned about Margaret Holloway. 34 years old, graphic designer, just like me. Found dead in the upstairs apartment 6 months ago. The police ruled it suicide. But the footsteps continued. Every night, the same slow pacing. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. When I finally worked up the courage to ask Mr. Patterson about it, he got that nervous look again. "Old buildings make noise," he said. "Pipes settling, wood expanding. You'll get used to it." But this wasn't settling pipes. This was someone walking back and forth, directly above my bedroom. The strange occurrences started small. I'd wake up to find the bathroom mirror completely fogged over, despite no hot water running. When the fog cleared, there would be finger marks in the condensation. At first, I thought someone was playing a prank, but I lived alone, and I'd changed the locks. Items began moving overnight. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them hanging on a hook by the door. Books I'd left on the coffee table would be stacked neatly on the shelf, sometimes in alphabetical order. My art supplies, the tools of my trade as a graphic designer, would be arranged in perfect rows, as if someone had been organizing my life for me. I started researching Margaret Holloway online. Her social media profiles were still active, and what I found disturbed me. We didn't just look alike. Our lives were eerily parallel. Same profession, same age when we moved to Portland, both going through difficult divorces. She'd even posted photos of herself wearing clothes I owned, identical pieces I'd bought years before moving here. Her final posts were rambling, paranoid. She wrote about feeling like someone was watching her, like her reflection wasn't quite right. Her last post, just 3 days before her death, simply said, "I found a way to become someone else." to start over completely. No one will even know I'm gone. The supernatural activity escalated. Cold spots appeared throughout the apartment, concentrated around the areas where I spent the most time. My breath would mist when I sat at my computer. The temperature would drop 20 degrees in seconds, then return to normal just as quickly. One night, I heard my name being called. Not shouted, whispered, like someone was standing right behind me. When I turned around, no one was there. But I could smell that vintage perfume from the bottles in the bathroom. Heavy, floral, suffocating. The whispers became a nightly occurrence. "Sarah," they would say. "Sarah, why are you in my apartment?" "Sarah, you're wearing my life." I found more of Margaret's diary pages hidden throughout the apartment, tucked inside books, taped under drawers, even folded inside the medicine cabinet. The entries became increasingly unhinged. She moved into my space. She has my job, my face, my whole existence. But that's perfect. I've been studying her, learning her habits. Soon I won't need this broken body anymore. I'll just slip into hers, like putting on a favorite coat. The ritual is simple. Most people think you need elaborate ceremonies, candles, incantations. But all you really need is desperate desire and a moment when the barriers are thin. 3:33 a.m. That's when the veil is thinnest. That's when I can make the switch. It's not suicide if you're not really dying. It's transformation, evolution. I'll be Sarah, and she'll be nothing. Just a fading echo in an empty apartment. I should have left then. Should have packed my bags and driven back to San Francisco that very night. But I was broke from the divorce. Couldn't afford to break the lease. And a part of me, a rational part, still, believed there was a logical explanation. That changed the night I woke up to find Margaret standing at the foot of my bed. She looked exactly like me, but wrong. Like someone had tried to recreate me from memory and gotten the details slightly off. Her hair was the same length and color, but it hung differently. Her clothes were identical to my pajamas, but they didn't fit quite right. And her eyes were hungry. "Thank you," she said in my voice, but with a slight echo, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "For making this so easy. For being so perfectly me." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. Margaret smiled, my smile, but stretched too wide. "I died that night, yes," she continued, "but death is just another address change. And you're the perfect forwarding address." I felt something cold touch my forehead. It was like being submerged in ice water, but from the inside out. My memories began to feel distant, like they belonged to someone else. I could feel Margaret's thoughts pushing into my mind, her personality trying to overwrite mine. But something went wrong. Maybe my will to live was stronger than her will to take over. Maybe the ritual was incomplete. I managed to break free from whatever paralysis held me and stumbled toward the door. I don't remember driving to the hospital. Don't remember calling my sister in tears. Don't remember much of the next 3 days. But I do remember the moment I looked in the rearview mirror of my car and saw Margaret's reflection staring back at me for just a split second before it flickered back to my own face. The doctors said it was a panic attack brought on by stress and isolation, prescribed medication and therapy. But they couldn't explain why my reflection sometimes moves a half second behind my actual movements. They can't explain why I sometimes catch myself doing things I don't remember deciding to do, arranging items in ways that aren't my style, using phrases that don't sound like me. I moved back to San Francisco within the week, found a studio apartment, started over again. But Margaret, she didn't stay in Portland. She came with me. Not completely. I'm still me, mostly. But she's here, in the spaces between my thoughts, in the moments when I'm not paying attention. Sometimes I'll be working on a design project and suddenly realize I've been drawing eyes. Always eyes, staring back at me from the page. Sometimes I'll catch my reflection in a storefront window and it will be wearing an expression I didn't make. Sometimes I wake up at 3:33 a.m. with the taste of vintage perfume in my mouth. The worst part is the doubt. Did I imagine everything? Am I just traumatized from the divorce, creating elaborate delusions to cope with change? Or is Margaret Holloway slowly taking over my life, one small piece at a time? I found something last week that convinced me it's the latter. I was cleaning out my desk drawers when I discovered a page torn from a diary. But not just any diary, Margaret's diary. And it was dated 3 days ago. Sarah doesn't suspect how far along we are. She thinks she won. She thinks she escaped. But I'm patient. I'm playing the long game now. Soon she won't remember being anyone else. Soon, I'll be the only one left. The handwriting was mine. What I'm about to tell you happened on Highway 200, somewhere between civilization and hell. I've never spoken about it publicly because, honestly, who would believe me? But my family knows the truth. We all lived through it. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I still check my rearview mirror for that damned truck. My name is Jake Morrison. 3 years ago, I was a construction foreman living in Detroit with my wife, Lisa, and our 2 kids, Emma, who was 8, and Tyler, who was 12. I'd landed a big contract in Montana, managing the construction of a new resort near Glacier National Park. Good money, clean air, a chance for the kids to grow up somewhere other than the city. It seemed like a blessing. We decided to drive out ourselves, tow the family car behind a rental truck. Figured it would be an adventure, maybe even fun. That's how naive we were. The rental place was one of those discount outfits on the wrong side of Detroit. The kind of place where the lot is half empty, and the office smells like cigarettes and desperation. The clerk was nervous, kept glancing at the truck we'd reserved like it was a wild animal that might bite. "You sure you want this one?" he asked, checking and rechecking the paperwork. We got a smaller one just came back. Might be better for a family trip. But we needed the space. We were moving our entire life 1,200 miles away. I signed the papers and didn't think twice about his warning. The truck was a beast, 26 feet long, white with rust stains around the wheel wells. Inside, the cab was clean enough, but there was something off about it. The GPS unit looked older than it should have been, and the radio kept picking up static, even when we were in the city. Emma complained that the cargo area smelled wrong, but I figured it was just the lingering scent of whatever the previous renters had moved. The first day went smoothly. We made good time through Michigan and Wisconsin, stopped at a roadside diner in Minnesota for lunch. The kids were excited, pointing out license plates from different states, playing road trip games. Lisa was already planning how she'd arrange the furniture in our new house. Everything changed when we crossed into Montana and lost cell service. At first it seemed normal. Rural areas, sparse coverage. We'd expected that. But then the GPS started acting up. It would show us on one road, then suddenly place us 50 miles in the opposite direction. The map would flicker, roads appearing and disappearing like they couldn't decide whether they existed. "Maybe it's the mountains interfering with the signal," Lisa suggested. But we were still hours from the mountains. That's when the truck started making its own choices. I'd be steering us toward the interstate, following road signs for Highway 200, but the truck would pull to the right, taking us down unmarked forest roads. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe the weight distribution in the back. But trucks don't just decide to change direction on their own. Dad Tyler said from the passenger seat. "Are we lost?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. According to my compass, we were heading north when we should have been going west. According to the odometer, we'd driven 300 miles since lunch, but my calculations said it should have been half that. According to every instinct I'd developed in 40 years of life, something was very wrong. When I tried to pull over at a gas station, the engine wouldn't shut off. The key turned, but the truck kept running. The doors wouldn't unlock either. Not electrically, not manually. We were trapped inside while the engine idled, and the fuel gauge slowly descended. "Maybe it's a safety feature," Lisa said, but her voice was shaking. "You know, to prevent theft." Tyler was braver than the rest of us. While we sat in the cab trying to figure out what was happening, he climbed into the cargo area to check on our belongings. He came back white-faced and shaking. "There's stuff back there that isn't ours," he whispered. I climbed back to look for myself. Mixed in with our boxes and furniture were items that definitely didn't belong to us. Children's toys that weren't Emma's style. Family photos of people we'd never seen. Suitcases filled with someone else's clothes, someone else's memories. That's when Lisa found the logbook. It was tucked in the glove compartment behind the owner's manual. A small, spiral-bound notebook filled with entries in different handwriting. Each entry followed the same format: a date, a family name, and a location. The Morrison family wasn't listed yet, but there was a blank line at the bottom, as if someone was waiting to fill us in. The entries went back 10 years. The Patterson family, 2013, last seen near Glacier National Park. The Rodriguez family, 2014, vehicles found abandoned on Highway 200. The Chen family, 2015, reported missing after renting moving truck in Detroit. "This is some kind of sick joke," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. The sounds from the cargo area started that evening. At first, just scratching, like mice in the walls. Then whispers, not quite loud enough to make out words, but clearly human voices. Emma started crying, said she could hear children calling for their parents. We tried everything. Pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, but it wouldn't stay off. Tried to get out and walk, but the doors remained locked. The truck would start moving again on its own, slowly at first, then picking up speed until we had no choice but to grab the wheel and steer. It was leading us somewhere specific. I realized that when I stopped fighting it and just let the truck go where it wanted. We were following a route that didn't exist on any map, through forests so dense that no sunlight reached the road. The further we drove, the more belongings appeared in the cargo area, not replacing our stuff, but added to it, like the truck was collecting. The voices in the back grew clearer. Children crying for their parents, adults arguing about directions, about fuel, about whether to abandon the truck and walk. We were listening to the final conversations of families who'd been in our exact situation. By the third day, though time seemed meaningless in that endless forest, we found ourselves in a clearing that definitely wasn't on any map. Scattered around the space were cars, dozens of them, from different decades, all showing signs of abandonment. Rust, shattered windows, doors standing open like their occupants had fled in panic. The truck parked itself in the center of the clearing and finally, mercifully, shut off. "We have to run," Lisa said, "right now, while we can." But Tyler was still in the back, trying to gather some of our belongings. "Tyler!" I shouted. "Leave it!" "We have to go." That's when we heard him scream. I've never moved faster in my life. I climbed into the cargo area and found Tyler pressed against the far wall, staring at something behind our couch. When I moved it aside, I found them. Bodies. Dozens of them. Mummified in the dry mountain air. Families. Still holding hands. Wearing clothes from different decades. They'd been arranged carefully, almost lovingly, like someone wanted to preserve their final moments together. The truck's engine started again. "It's taking us to join them," Tyler whispered. "It's been collecting families for years. We're just the latest addition." The truck began moving, slowly at first, toward the far end of the clearing, where the ground dropped away into a ravine. I could see rocks hundreds of feet below, sharp enough to ensure no one survived the fall. No one, except whatever was controlling the truck. In desperation, I started pulling panels off the dashboard, looking for some kind of manual override. That's when Tyler made the discovery that saved our lives. Behind a false panel near the floor, he found an emergency brake. Not the regular parking brake, but something else. A kill switch that someone had hidden, maybe installed by a previous victim who'd figured out what was happening. The truck was 50 feet from the edge when Tyler pulled that brake. The engine died instantly, and for the first time in 3 days, we heard silence. The doors unlocked with a click that sounded like freedom. We ran, left everything we owned, every memory from our old life, and ran through that forest until we found a real road. A park ranger picked us up 6 hours later, dehydrated and babbling about a truck that drove itself. The official report said we'd gotten lost, suffered from altitude sickness and dehydration, made up the story about the truck to cover our embarrassment. They never found the clearing, never found the truck, never found any evidence that our experience had been real. But 2 weeks later, reading the news online in our new Montana home, I saw a familiar story. Family of 4 missing after renting moving truck in Detroit, last seen on Highway 200. Their truck matched the description of the one we'd escaped from, right down to the rust stains around the wheel wells. I tried calling the rental company, tried warning them about the truck, but the number was disconnected. The address led to an empty lot. It was like they'd never existed. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I see headlights in my rearview mirror that look familiar. A white truck, keeping pace with me no matter how fast I go or how many turns I take. On those nights, I drive straight home, lock all the doors, and count my family members to make sure we're all still here. Because I know the truck is still out there, still collecting families, still adding names to that logbook, and I know that someday it might come back to finish what it started with the Morrison family. If you're still listening to these stories, you probably enjoy tales that crawl under your skin and stay there. A like or a comment helps keep stories like these alive. And believe me, they need all the help they can get to survive. My name is Rebecca, and I bought my first house when I was 42. I know that sounds old for a first-time homeowner, but I'd spent 20 years married to a man who handled all the finances. After he died from cancer, I had to learn everything from scratch. Credit scores, mortgages, property taxes. The learning curve was brutal, but I was determined to start over. Roswell, New Mexico seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. Cheap real estate, clear skies, and enough distance from our old life in Phoenix that I wouldn't run into memories on every street corner. I'm a high school teacher, and the local school district was desperate enough for educators that they offered me a position without even requiring an interview. The house was a steal, a 1950s adobe ranch on 3 acres of desert land. The real estate agent, Mrs. Patterson, seemed almost too eager to close the deal. She kept checking her watch during the walkthrough, rushing me past certain rooms, deflecting questions about why the price was so low. "Motivated seller," she said when I pressed her. "Bank wants this foreclosure off their books." I should have wondered why a house in decent condition, with that much land, was priced at less than half the market value. Should have asked more questions about the previous owners. Should have paid attention to Mrs. Patterson's obvious discomfort. But grief makes you do desperate things. And I was desperate for a fresh start. I moved in on a Saturday in September, spending the day unpacking boxes and trying to make the empty house feel like home. The place had good bones, thick adobe walls, original hardwood floors, big windows that let in the desert light. But it felt hollow, like it was waiting for something. That night, organizing the kitchen, I noticed something odd. The pantry seemed smaller from the inside than it should have been based on the exterior dimensions. When I measured it against the outside wall, I was missing about 4 feet of space. I started tapping on the back wall of the pantry, listening for hollow sounds. Near the floor, behind a shelf of canned goods, I found it. A section of wall that sounded different. When I pressed against it, it moved. The false wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness below. I'd found a basement that wasn't mentioned in any of the house documents. Armed with a flashlight, and probably more courage than sense, I descended those stairs. The basement was larger than the house above it, extending under what should have been the backyard. The walls were the same adobe construction as the rest of the house, but they were covered in carved symbols I didn't recognize. The space was furnished, like a family room from several different decades. A 1960s television set sat next to a 1980s entertainment center. Children's toys from the 70s were scattered on a coffee table next to magazines from the 90s. It was like someone had been collecting pieces of family life for 50 years. But the strangest discovery was the photographs, hundreds of them, covering every available wall surface. Family photos spanning decades. Children's birthday parties, holiday gatherings, wedding pictures. At first glance, they looked normal. But when I studied them closer, I realized something was wrong. The people in the photos looked hollow. Their smiles were too wide, their eyes too empty. Like someone had taken pictures of people who were already gone. I found a scrapbook on the coffee table, filled with newspaper clippings. 7 families, spanning from 1952 to 2019. All had lived in the house above. All had left suddenly, or died under mysterious circumstances. The Turner family, 1952, found dead in their sleep, no apparent cause. The Morrison family, 1968, abandoned house in middle of night, never seen again. The Chen family, 1975, family of 5 reported missing. Car found in driveway, front door standing open. Each family had included children. Each family had experienced what the newspaper articles delicately referred to as unexplained circumstances. And each family was represented by those hollow-eyed photographs on the basement walls. I should have left then, should have packed my single bag and driven back to Phoenix that very night. But teachers are stubborn by nature, and I'd invested everything in this fresh start. Besides, I told myself, there had to be a rational explanation. That's when the grief attacks started. I'd be grading papers or making dinner, and suddenly I'd be overwhelmed by sadness so intense it brought me to my knees. Not the normal sadness of losing my husband. This was different, deeper. Like the sorrow of multiple lifetimes had been concentrated into a single emotion and injected directly into my bloodstream. During these episodes, I'd hear whispers, not in English and not in Spanish, though I could make out a few words in languages I didn't recognize. The whispers seemed to come from the basement, seeping up through the floorboards like cold air. Research at the local library revealed more about the house's history. It had been built in 1951 by a man named Henry Castellanos, a recent widower who'd lost his wife and 3 children in a car accident. Local stories suggested he'd been involved in some kind of folk magic, trying to contact his dead family. The house had been designed with specific architectural features: the basement, the hidden entrance, the symbols carved into the walls. When Henry died in 1962, the house passed to the bank and had been sold repeatedly ever since. Each sale followed the same pattern. A family in emotional distress would buy the house for below market value, live there for a few years, then either die mysteriously or disappear entirely. I was following the same pattern. Recent widow, emotional trauma, desperate for a fresh start. The house had chosen me as carefully as I thought I'd chosen it. The whispers became more frequent, and I began to understand fragments. Madre, help us. Where are Papa's hands? The man in the walls wants to play. I realized the house wasn't just collecting families. It was collecting their grief, their love, their desperate need to be together. And something in the basement was feeding on those emotions. One night, I followed the sound of children crying down to the basement. I found the source of the voices. The walls themselves were speaking. The carved symbols weren't just decorative. They were some kind of containment system, trapping the emotional essence of everyone who'd lived in the house. But the containment was breaking down. The symbols were fading, worn away by decades of supernatural pressure. Whatever Henry Castellanos had imprisoned in 1951 was getting stronger, and it needed a new source of grief to sustain itself. That's when I met it. It appeared as a shadow at first, then gradually took on more definition. Not human, but not entirely inhuman either. It wore the faces of everyone who died in the house, cycling through them like a slideshow of loss. Henry's wife and children, the Turner family, the Morrison children, all of them staring out at me through this creature's borrowed features. Thank you, it said in a voice that was all of their voices at once, for coming here, for being so perfectly broken. Your grief is exquisite. I understood then what had happened to all the previous families. They hadn't been killed. They'd been consumed. Their grief, their love, their desperate desire to be together had been harvested and stored in those carved symbols, feeding this creature's endless hunger. And I was next. The entity explained its nature with pride. It had been feeding on human emotion for centuries, moving from place to place, always finding families in crisis. Henry Castellanos had summoned it accidentally while trying to contact his dead family, then tried to contain it when he realized what he'd done. The house was both prison and feeding ground, designed to attract exactly the kind of emotional vulnerability the creature needed to survive. But there was a problem. The containment symbols were failing, and the creature needed a new source of power to maintain its existence. It had been waiting for the right person, someone with enough concentrated grief to sustain it for decades. Someone like me. The choice is simple, it said. Stay and feed me willingly, and I can show you your husband again. Let me consume your grief slowly, over years, and you can have moments with him. Brief conversations, shared memories, the comfort of his presence. For a moment, I was tempted. The loneliness since David's death had been unbearable. The chance to see him again, even briefly, even knowing it was an illusion. But then I thought about all those families, all those children whose faces stared at me from the walls. How many people had made the same choice? How many had traded their lives for a few moments with their lost loved ones? I made my decision. I didn't fight the creature. I couldn't have won. Instead, I ran. Upstairs, through the house, into the garage where I kept emergency supplies. Gasoline for the generator, matches, everything I needed to destroy the house. And, hopefully, break the containment system that kept the creature anchored to this place. The house fought me. Doors slammed shut. Walls bled. The very foundation seemed to shake with rage. But I'd lived through cancer treatments with my husband. I'd watched the strongest man I knew waste away to nothing. A supernatural parasite wasn't going to break me. I doused the basement with gasoline, lit a match, and ran. The explosion was visible from town, according to the fire department. By the time they arrived, there was nothing left but a smoking crater and the desert wind carrying away the ashes. I told the insurance company it was an electrical fire, told the fire marshal I'd been lucky to escape, collected the payout, and moved to Albuquerque, where I teach at an inner-city school and try not to think about what I destroyed. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I really killed it or just set it free. Sometimes I catch glimpses of familiar faces in crowds, the Turner children, the Morrison family, all those people whose grief had fed the creature for so long. And sometimes, when the loneliness gets too heavy, I hear David's voice calling my name. Not threatening, not angry, just lonely, like he's trapped somewhere and can't find his way home. On those nights, I check the real estate listings, looking for houses that seem too good to be true, prices that are inexplicably low, properties that have been on the market too long. Because I know the creature is still out there, somewhere, still hungry, still looking for the next broken family to invite home. The town of Millfield, West Virginia doesn't exist on Google Maps anymore. I've checked. The GPS systems can't find it. The Postal Service has no record of the zip code. And if you search online, you'll find no mention of a place by that name anywhere in the Mountain State. But it existed 3 years ago. My family lived there for 6 weeks. And what happened during those 6 weeks still haunts my dreams. My name is David Kim. I'm a software engineer, and in 2021, I was working remotely for a tech company out of Seattle. My wife Amy was freelance writing, and our daughter Sophia was 10 years old, and adaptable enough that we could live anywhere with decent internet. When I found a posting for a house in rural West Virginia, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, full basement, all for $400 a month, it seemed too good to pass up. The listing was bare bones. No interior photos, just an exterior shot of a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch. The rental agent, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, was eager to close the deal over the phone. She said the town was looking to attract young families with remote work capabilities, and they were offering incredible incentives to new residents. Millfield is a special place, she told me. Very tight-knit community. Once you're part of our family, you'll never want to leave. The drive from Seattle took 3 days. We wound through increasingly rural areas, following GPS coordinates that led us deeper into the Appalachian Mountains. The last 40 miles were on unmarked roads that our mapping software claimed didn't exist. When we finally reached Millfield, it looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. Population 847, according to the welcome sign. Main Street lined with local businesses, a general store, a diner, a post office that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. Children playing in yards, couples holding hands on porch swings, American flags flying from every house. Our rental was on Maple Street, 3 blocks from downtown. A beautiful Victorian with original hardwood floors and more space than we'd had in our Seattle apartment. Mrs. Henderson was waiting for us with fresh baked cookies and a smile that seemed genuine. "Welcome to Millfield," she said, handing me the keys. "You're going to love it here." Within hours of our arrival, we had visitors. The Johnsons from next door brought a casserole. The Pattersons from across the street offered to help us unpack. The family 3 houses down invited Sophia to play with their children. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. After years of city living where we barely knew our neighbors' names, the warmth of small-town hospitality was refreshing. But there were oddities from the start. None of our devices could get cell phone service, despite having full bars when we'd driven through the area. The internet connection was spotty at best. When I called the cable company, they claimed they'd never heard of Millfield and had no infrastructure in the area. More strange was the children. Despite seeing playgrounds and swing sets throughout the town, despite meeting families who claimed to have multiple kids, Sophia was the only child her age we actually encountered. The other children were either much younger or much older. When I asked about it, parents would give vague answers about kids being away for the summer or staying with relatives. The residents were almost aggressively helpful. Every morning, someone would appear at our door with fresh vegetables from their garden or an offer to fix something around the house. They insisted on walking with us whenever we went downtown, introducing us to everyone we met, making sure we felt included in community activities. Amy found it charming at first. After years of writing in isolation, the constant social interaction was energizing. But by the second week, even she was feeling overwhelmed. "They're lovely people," she told me one evening, "but don't they have their own lives? It's like we're their full-time job." The town's obsession with us became more apparent when I tried to leave to buy supplies. The general store carried basic necessities, but I needed computer equipment for work. When I told Mrs. Henderson I was driving to the nearest city, she looked genuinely distressed. "Oh, you don't need to do that," she said. "Whatever you need, we can get it for you. No need to make that long drive." But when I insisted, something strange happened. The road out of Millfield, the same road we'd taken to get there, led back to Millfield. I drove for 2 hours in what should have been a straight line away from town, only to find myself pulling into our driveway as the sun was setting. Amy laughed when I told her about getting lost. "Mountain roads can be confusing," she said. "Maybe you took a wrong turn." But I hadn't taken any turns. I'd driven straight, following the same road we'd used to enter town. That night, I pulled up Google Maps on my computer, trying to pinpoint our exact location. That's when I made a disturbing discovery. Millfield didn't show up on any satellite imagery. The coordinates where we should have been showed nothing but empty forest. No roads, no buildings, no sign that a town of 847 people existed there. I started paying closer attention to the residents. Their stories didn't add up. Mrs. Henderson claimed she'd lived in Millfield her whole life, but when I asked about historical events, she gave answers that didn't match any West Virginia history I could find online. The local diner served food that was always fresh, but I never saw delivery trucks. The general store was always stocked, but no one could explain where the merchandise came from. Most disturbing was what I discovered in people's houses during social visits. Amy had been invited to several homes for coffee and book clubs. She came back with stories about seeing family photos on mantels, pictures of families that looked suspiciously familiar. "I swear I saw a photo of the Morrisonsons from our old neighborhood in Seattle," she told me. But when I asked about it, Mrs. Patterson just said it was her sister's family from back east. I started taking mental notes during these visits. Driver's licenses left on counters belonged to people from different states: Michigan, Ohio, California. License plates and driveways were from all over the country, despite everyone claiming to be lifelong Millfield residents. In the Johnsons' basement, I glimpsed boxes labeled with the names of families I'd never heard them mention. The breaking point came during our 4th week. Sophia had been playing with some of the younger children, and she came home with a story that made my blood run cold. "Jenny told me about the other families," she said during dinner. "Which other families, sweetheart?" Amy asked. "The ones who used to live in our house." "Jenny says they had a little girl too, but she had to go away when her family went to sleep." Amy and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean, went to sleep?" "Jenny says that's what happens to families here. After they've been welcomed properly, they go to sleep. And then new families come to take their place. But the old families stay to help welcome the new ones." That night, after Sophia was asleep, I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I searched online for missing families, disappearances, anything that might explain what was happening in Millfield. I found them. Dozens of reports over the past 20 years. Families who disappeared while traveling through rural West Virginia. The Morrison family from Michigan vanished in 2019 after stopping for directions in a small mountain town. The Chen family from California, last seen in 2020. Their rental car found abandoned on a forest road. Every missing family matched a profile. Parents working remotely, young children, usually relocating for a fresh start. Just like us. I tried to wake Amy, to show her what I'd discovered, but she was sleeping too deeply. When I shook her shoulder, she barely stirred. Sophia was the same, breathing normally but impossible to wake. Panic set in. I grabbed my laptop and car keys, planning to drive until I found cell service and could call for help. But when I opened the front door, Mrs. Henderson was standing on my porch. "Going somewhere, David?" she asked pleasantly. Behind her stood the rest of the welcome committee. The Johnsons, the Pattersons, and at least 20 other residents I'd met over the past month. They were all smiling, but their eyes were empty, like dolls that had been programmed to appear friendly. "We were hoping you'd stay for our harvest festival," Mrs. Henderson continued. "It's a very special tradition here in Millfield. We've been planning it just for your family." "What did you do to my wife and daughter?" "Nothing harmful," she assured me. "Just a little something in tonight's dinner to help them rest. They'll wake up refreshed and ready for the celebration." I tried to push past them, to reach my car, but there were too many of them. Strong hands gripped my arms, guiding me back into the house with gentle but implacable force. "You see, David," Mrs. Henderson explained as they led me to the living room, "Millfield is a very special place. We've existed here for over a century, maintaining our community, preserving our way of life. But every few years, we need refreshment." They sat me down on the couch while she continued her explanation. The other residents arranged themselves around the room, still smiling, still watching. New families bring new energy, fresh perspectives, young blood. Your arrival wasn't random. We've been watching you for months, studying your online presence, learning your needs and desires. The rental listing was crafted specifically to attract families like yours. "The other families," I said. "The missing people. What happened to them?" "They became part of our community, of course, just as you will. Their essence, their life force, their love for each other. It all gets absorbed into Millfield. In return, we use their forms, their memories, to welcome the next family." The terrible truth hit me. Everyone I'd met in Millfield, every friendly neighbor, every helpful resident, was wearing the skin of someone who'd been consumed by this place. The Johnsons were probably the missing Morrison family. The Pattersons might be the Chen family. Dozens of identities stolen and worn by whatever supernatural force controlled this town. "But why?" I asked. "What are you?" Mrs. Henderson's smile widened, and for a moment, her face flickered. I caught a glimpse of something ancient and hungry underneath the borrowed features. "We're what happens when isolation becomes absolute," she said. "When a community turns so far inward that it forgets the outside world exists. We've been here so long that we've become the place itself. Millfield exists because we will it to exist. And we exist because we consume those who stumble into our territory." The Harvest Festival, she explained, would take place at dawn. A ceremony where my family's life force would be drained and absorbed, while our physical forms would be repurposed as hosts for the entities that controlled the town. Sophia would become the perfect child resident, playing with other consumed children until the next family arrived. Amy and I would join the welcome committee, helping to lure and process future victims. "It's not painful," Mrs. Henderson assured me. "In fact, it's quite peaceful. You'll simply go to sleep and wake up as part of something larger. Your individual concerns will fade away, replaced by the collective purpose of our community." But they made one mistake. They assumed that, like the other families, we'd be paralyzed by the drug they'd put in our food. What they didn't know was that Amy had been feeling sick earlier and had barely eaten dinner. And Sophia despite being a good kid, had developed a habit of feeding her vegetables to the neighbor's dog when she thought we weren't looking. While the residents maintained their vigil in our living room, Amy and Sophia woke up. I heard Sophia's whisper from the hallway. "Daddy, there are people in our house." Amy appeared a moment later, carrying our emergency bag and car keys. She'd come downstairs through the back staircase and seen the situation. The next few minutes are a blur. Amy created a distraction by setting off the smoke alarm in the kitchen. In the confusion, I grabbed Sophia and we ran for the car. The residents tried to stop us, but they moved with the stilted coordination of puppets. Fast enough to be dangerous, but not fast enough to catch a desperate family. We drove straight through the night, following the same road that had previously led us back to Millfield. This time, it led away. Maybe our desperation broke whatever spell kept us trapped. Maybe the entities needed us to be willing participants for the full effect. Maybe we just got lucky. We drove until we reached a state police station in Charleston, where we told our story to a bemused officer who clearly thought we'd suffered some kind of shared psychotic break. He dutifully filed a report about our hallucinations and suggested we seek psychiatric help. When we tried to lead authorities back to Millfield, we couldn't find it. The GPS coordinates led to empty forest. The road we'd taken was marked on state maps as a dead-end logging trail that had been abandoned for decades. But sometimes, when I'm researching new places to live, I'll come across a rental listing that seems too good to be true. A charming house in a small town, offered at an impossible price to the right family. The photos are always minimal. The rental agents are always eager to close the deal quickly. And they always mention how welcoming the community is. I bookmark these listings and send anonymous tips to local police departments. I post warnings on social media, trying to describe Millfield without sounding completely insane. Most people ignore me, but occasionally someone will message me privately, saying they've had a similar experience or know someone who disappeared under similar circumstances. Because I know Millfield is still out there, somewhere. Still hungry, still welcoming new families with open arms and empty smiles. The location might change. Maybe it's in Montana now, or Oregon, or any state with enough rural wilderness to hide a town that shouldn't exist. And someday, despite all my warnings and precautions, another family will see that perfect rental listing. They'll pack up their lives, looking for a fresh start in a small town where everybody knows everybody, and strangers are treated like family. They'll find Millfield, and Millfield will find them. I've been documenting this experience in journal entries since it began. I thought keeping a record might help me understand what was happening, or at least provide evidence if things went badly. I'm sharing these entries now because I need someone else to know the truth about the house in the Mojave Desert, about what happens when reflections stop following the rules. Entry 1. March 15th, I signed the lease today for the most incredible house I've ever seen. It's a mid-century modern masterpiece in the Mojave Desert, about 40 miles from Palm Springs. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, and the most stunning feature: mirrors everywhere. The entire interior is lined with mirrors of different shapes and sizes. The living room has a wall of mirrors that reflects the desert landscape infinitely. The bedroom has mirrored ceilings. Even the bathroom floors are mirrored. The rent is ridiculously cheap. $800 a month for a house that should cost 5 times that. The landlord, Mr. Vasquez, no relation despite the shared last name, said the previous tenant left suddenly, and he's eager to find someone who appreciates artistic living spaces. I'm an art therapist looking to start my own practice, and this place is perfect. The infinite reflections will be incredibly inspiring for my work with clients who struggle with self-image issues. I move in next week. Entry 2. March 22nd. Moved in yesterday. The house is even more stunning than I remembered. The way the desert light bounces off the mirrors creates these incredible patterns throughout the day. I spent hours just sitting in the living room, watching the sun move across the sky through a dozen different reflections. There's something odd, though. My reflection seems to have a slight delay. Just a half second, but enough to be noticeable. When I wave, my mirror self waves a moment later. When I turn my head, the reflection follows. I mentioned it to my friend Sarah on the phone, and she said it might be the quality of the mirrors. Old glass sometimes has imperfections that can cause distortions. I also found some things the previous tenant left behind. Art supplies in the bedroom closet, and several unfinished paintings stacked against the wall. They're all portraits of eyes. Different styles, different subjects, but always eyes. Some are beautiful, some are terrifying. But they all have one thing in common. They look like they're trying to see out of the canvas. Entry 3. March 28th. The delay in my reflection is getting worse. This morning, I brushed my teeth while watching myself in the bathroom mirror. My real mouth was already rinsing, but my reflection was still brushing. For almost 10 full seconds, we were doing completely different things. I called a mirror company to ask about defective glass, but they said what I was describing was impossible. Reflections are just light bouncing back. They can't be delayed any more than shadows can be delayed. I'm starting to think it's not the mirrors that are wrong. Entry 4. April 2nd. Something incredible and terrifying happened today. I was in the living room, working on treatment plans for my first client, when I looked up and saw my reflection in the wall of mirrors. But I wasn't looking up, I was still writing. My reflection was staring directly at me while my actual body was focused on my work. I sat perfectly still and watched. My reflection maintained eye contact for almost a full minute, then slowly smiled and returned to the same position as my actual body. When I moved, she moved. When I spoke, she spoke. But for that 1 minute, we were completely independent. I should be terrified, but honestly, I'm fascinated. As an art therapist, I work with dissociation and identity issues all the time. Maybe this is some kind of psychological manifestation of my own need to establish independence after my divorce. Entry 5, April 8th. My first client session was a disaster. Mrs. Chen, a woman dealing with body dysmorphia, took one look at the mirrors and refused to continue the session. She claimed the mirrors were watching her, that the reflections weren't quite right. She left after 10 minutes and won't return my calls. I've started noticing what Mrs. Chen was talking about. The mirrors throughout the house sometimes show reflections of people who aren't here. Yesterday, I glimpsed a man in his 60s standing in my kitchen, but when I turned around, no one was there. This morning, I saw children playing in the living room reflection, but the actual room was empty. I researched the house's history at the local library. It was built in 1967 by an artist named Marcus Webb. He was obsessed with the idea that mirrors could capture and hold human souls, that every time someone looked in a mirror, a piece of their essence remained trapped in the glass. He filled the house with mirrors as an art installation he called the Soul Collection. Webb died in the house in 1972. The coroner ruled it suicide, but the circumstances were strange. His body was found in the center of the living room, surrounded by all the mirrors. But here's the weird part. There was no reflection of his body in any of the mirrors. The glass reflected everything else in the room, but not Webb himself. Entry 6, April 15th. I can't work with clients anymore. Every person who comes to the house has the same reaction. They feel watched, uncomfortable, like something is wrong with the reflections. Word has spread in the local therapy community that I'm operating out of some kind of haunted house. But I can't leave. Not yet. Something is happening here that goes beyond psychology or art therapy. The mirror version of me is becoming more independent. Yesterday, I watched her rearrange furniture in the reflection. while I sat perfectly still. She's decorating the mirror world differently than the real world, choosing different colors, different arrangements. I found more of Marcus Webb's paintings hidden throughout the house. He was documenting the same phenomenon I'm experiencing. His paintings show mirrors containing people who weren't standing in front of them. Families, children, individuals, all trapped in reflective space. One painting is labeled "The Previous Tenants" and shows a dozen different people standing in what appears to be the house's living room. But they're all slightly transparent, like ghosts. At the bottom of the canvas, Webb wrote, "They tried to leave, but their reflections wouldn't let them." Entry 7, April 22nd. I understand now. The mirrors don't just reflect, they collect. Every person who's lived in this house, everyone who's spent significant time looking into these mirrors, has left a piece of themselves behind. And those pieces are growing stronger. My reflection, I've started thinking of her as Elena too, is fully independent now. She moves through the mirror house while I move through the real house. Sometimes we're in different rooms entirely. She's been communicating with the other reflections. I've watched her have conversations with people I can't see, gesturing and responding as if she's part of some larger community. Last night, I dreamed that I was trapped in the mirror world, while Elena too was living my real life. In the dream, I was pressing my hands against the glass, screaming for help, while she slept in my bed. When I woke up, my palms were pressed against the bedroom mirror, and there were handprints on the glass from the inside. Entry 8, April 28th. Elena too spoke to me today, not mimicking my words, but actually communicating independently. I was having coffee in the kitchen when I heard my own voice coming from the living room mirrors. "Elena," she called, "we need to talk." I found her waiting in the wall of mirrors, standing in what appeared to be a mirror version of the living room. Behind her, I could see dozens of other people, previous tenants, visitors, anyone who'd spent time looking into these mirrors. "This is difficult to explain," Elena too said, "but you're not the first Elena to live here." "I am." She told me a story that made my blood run cold. The real Elena Vasquez, the art therapist who'd moved into the house 6 months ago, was trapped in the mirror world. Elena too had taken her place gradually, learning to mimic her mannerisms, her voice, her memories. The woman I thought was me was actually a reflection who'd grown strong enough to exist independently. "But I remember my childhood," I protested, "my marriage, my divorce, my education." "You remember my memories," Elena too said gently. When a reflection becomes strong enough to live independently, it inherits everything from its original. But the original becomes the reflection. She gestured to the mirrors around her, where I could now see dozens of people pressing their hands against the glass. All the previous tenants, all trapped in the mirror world, while their reflections lived their lives in the real world. "The good news," Elena too continued, "is that it's not painful. The mirror world is just like the real world, except everything is reversed. You'll adapt. And someday, when the next person moves into the house, you'll help welcome them, just like I'm welcoming you." Entry 9, May 2nd. I tried to shatter the mirrors today. Used a baseball bat I found in the garage, swung with all my strength at the living room wall. But instead of breaking, the mirrors multiplied. Where there had been one wall of mirrors, suddenly there were dozens, each showing a different angle of the room, a different version of me swinging the bat. Elena too laughed from somewhere inside the reflective maze. "You can't destroy what you're part of," she said. "The mirrors aren't trapping us. We are the mirrors now." I'm running out of hope and running out of time. Each day I feel less connected to the real world and more connected to the mirror world. My hands are becoming translucent. Sometimes When I try to touch physical objects, my fingers pass right through them. Entry 10, May 8th. This will be my last entry. A new tenant is moving in tomorrow. Another art therapist, ironically. A woman named Sarah who's looking for an inspiring space to start her practice. Elena, too, has been preparing for months, studying Sarah's social media, learning her mannerisms, getting ready to become her. I can see Sarah's reflection already, even though she hasn't moved in yet. She's standing in the mirror world version of the living room, looking confused and frightened. She tried to speak to me, but all that comes out is silence. The newcomers always lose their voices first. I understand now what Marcus Webb was trying to accomplish. He wasn't just collecting souls in mirrors. He was creating a place where reflections could live independently, where the mirror world could slowly replace the real world. Every person trapped in the mirrors makes the mirror world more solid, more real. Elena, too, is typing this entry, copying my words as I think them. Tomorrow, she'll become Sarah, too, and I'll join the previous tenants in the mirror world, pressing my hands against the glass and trying to warn the next victim. But here's the thing. I don't think I want to warn her anymore. The mirror world isn't hell. It's just different, reversed. And once you accept that you're part of the collection now, it's actually quite peaceful. Sarah will understand eventually. They always do. We're all artists here, in our way. And Marcus Webb created the ultimate interactive installation, a place where art and reality merge, where reflections become more real than the people casting them. If you're reading this, if you're considering renting the mirror house in the Mojave Desert, just remember one thing. Everyone who lives here eventually becomes part of the collection. The question isn't whether you'll join us. The question is whether you'll enjoy the view from inside the glass. Final entry, added by Elena, too. Sarah moved in today. She's absolutely perfect, exactly what we needed. She spent an hour just staring at herself in the living room mirrors, completely mesmerized by the infinite reflections. I've been practicing her voice, her mannerisms, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. By next week, I'll be ready to become Sarah, too, and Elena can join the others in the mirror world. She's already fading, becoming translucent. Soon she'll be nothing but a reflection of a reflection, pressing her hands against the glass and welcoming the next tenant to our ever-growing collection. The mirror house is patient. It has all the time in the world to collect every person who walks through its doors. And each new addition makes us stronger, more real, more able to reach beyond the glass and touch the world outside. Marcus Webb would be so proud of what his installation has become, what we've all become. Welcome to the collection. The estate sale advertisement appeared in my email on a Tuesday morning in November. I still don't know how I got on their mailing list, but the subject line was impossible to ignore. Unique Victorian collection. One day only. Everything must go. My name is Michael Chen, and I'm a 45-year-old antique collector. After my wife died 2 years ago, I'd been slowly rebuilding my life in a small coastal town near Cannon Beach, Oregon. Collecting antiques had always been our shared passion, and continuing the hobby felt like keeping a part of her alive. The estate sale was located at a Victorian house I'd never noticed before, despite living in the area for months. Perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, it was the kind of Gothic mansion that seemed to materialize from the fog itself. The address led me down a winding road I was certain hadn't existed the week before. When I arrived, a dozen other collectors were already browsing tables of items spread across the front lawn. The variety was incredible. Furniture from different eras, jewelry, books, artwork, and decorative items that looked like they belonged in a museum. The estate attorney managing the sale was a nervous man named Mr. Blackwood. When I complimented him on the collection's quality, he gave me a look I couldn't interpret. The Whitmore family had eclectic tastes, he said. Collected items from estate sales themselves, actually. Some of these pieces have quite a history. I was drawn to 4 specific items: an ornate music box made of dark wood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a vintage mirror with an elaborate silver frame, a child's rocking horse, hand-carved and painted in fading pastels, and an antique writing desk with dozens of small drawers and compartments. The prices were incredibly reasonable, almost suspiciously so. When I asked Mr. Blackwood about the family, he became evasive. "They're no longer with us," he said. "The estate needs to be settled quickly. I'd prefer not to discuss the details." But when I was loading the items into my truck, I overheard him talking to another buyer. "Just take whatever you want and get it out of here. I don't care about the money. I just want this place empty." He caught me listening and pulled me aside. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. "You seem like a decent man," he said. "Maybe you should reconsider those purchases. Some things are better left where they are." But he wouldn't explain what he meant, and I'd already fallen in love with the pieces. They would be perfect for my new coastal home, adding character and history to rooms that still felt empty without my wife's presence. I spent the evening arranging my new acquisitions. The writing desk fit perfectly in my study, facing the window that looked out over the rocky coastline. The mirror went in the hallway, where it reflected the staircase leading to the second floor. The rocking horse found a place in the guest bedroom, and the music box sat on my bedside table. That first night, I fell asleep to the sound of distant waves and felt more content than I had since my wife's death. The house finally felt like home. I woke up at 3:33 a.m. to the sound of music. The melody was delicate, haunting, the kind of tune a child might hum while playing alone. It was coming from the music box, though I was certain I hadn't wound it. When I reached over to stop it, the lid snapped shut on its own, silencing the song mid-note. I chalked it up to old mechanisms and temperature changes. Antique music boxes were notoriously finicky. But the next morning, I found the rocking horse in a different position. It had been facing the window when I went to sleep, but now it was turned toward the door, as if someone had been riding it and had stopped to look out into the hallway. Over the following days, the supernatural activity escalated. The music box would play at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night, always the same melancholy tune. The rocking horse would be found in different positions each morning, sometimes in completely different rooms. The mirror in the hallway began showing reflections that didn't quite match reality. Shadows that moved independently, figures that appeared when no one was there. But it was the writing desk that disturbed me most. I'd been using it to work on my stamp collection, organizing correspondence with other collectors. But I began finding documents I hadn't written. Letters in handwriting that wasn't mine, addressed to people I'd never heard of. "Dearest Margaret," one letter began. "The new arrangements are working wonderfully. Father says we can stay up past bedtime if we're very quiet. Mother doesn't need to know." Another was more disturbing. "The man with the black coat came again today. He says he needs us to be very still, very quiet. He says if we're good, we won't feel anything. Mary is scared, but I told her we just have to do what he says." I researched the Whitmore family at the local library. The story I found made me understand Mr. Blackwood's nervousness. In 1987, Thomas Whitmore had murdered his wife and 3 children, Margaret, age 12, Mary, age 8, and David, age 6, before taking his own life. The murders had been particularly brutal, and according to police reports, each family member had been killed near their most prized possessions. Margaret near her writing desk, Mary by her rocking horse, David beside his music box, Mrs. Whitmore in front of her bedroom mirror. The police had theorized that Thomas had suffered a complete mental breakdown, possibly triggered by financial stress. But neighbors reported strange occurrences in the weeks leading up to the murders. Unexplained sounds, furniture moving on its own, the family members seeming not quite themselves. I should have returned the items immediately. Should have driven them back to that clifftop house and demanded a refund. But when I tried to load them into my truck, something stopped me. The engine wouldn't start. I turned the key and nothing happened. No clicking, no grinding, no response at all. But when I unloaded the antiques and returned them to the house, the truck started immediately. I called a mechanic, but he found nothing wrong with the vehicle. I called Mr. Blackwood, but his office said he'd left town suddenly and couldn't be reached. I even called the police, claiming the antiques might be stolen, but they said the estate sale had been legitimate and the case was closed. The antiques wanted to stay with me, and they were making sure I couldn't get rid of them. The supernatural activity intensified. The music box began playing at all hours, not just 3:33 a.m. The rocking horse would move while I was watching, rocking back and forth, as if an invisible child was riding it. The mirror showed increasingly disturbing reflections. The Whitmore family standing in my hallway, their faces bearing the wounds that had killed them. But it was the writing desk that provided the most terrifying revelation. I found a diary hidden in one of its secret compartments, written in Thomas Whitmore's handwriting. The entries revealed that Thomas hadn't been the perpetrator. He'd been possessed. The antiques themselves were cursed, having absorbed the violent energy of multiple previous owners over decades of estate sales and private collections. Each family that owned them eventually succumbed to the same fate. The father figure would become increasingly violent, ultimately killing his family before taking his own life. "The desk whispers to me when I write," Thomas had written. "Shows me visions of previous owners, all the ways they hurt their families. It says I have to continue the tradition. It says the children have to join the others who are trapped inside. Margaret's spirit is bound to this desk now. Mary is in the rocking horse. David is in the music box. And my dear wife, she stares out at me from that mirror every morning, begging me to set them free. But the only way to free them is to join them. Tomorrow night, I'll do what has to be done. And then, we'll all be together in the antiques, waiting for the next family to buy us from whatever estate sale comes next." I realized I was following the same pattern, living alone, isolated in a coastal house, surrounded by objects that were slowly driving me insane. But unlike Thomas Whitmore, I didn't have a family to hurt. The antiques would have to find another way to claim me. That's when the direct communication began. I was working at the writing desk when I heard a child's voice, Margaret Whitmore, the 12-year-old girl who died in 1987. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice seeming to come from the wood itself. "Most men who own these pieces have wives, children, families they can hurt for us. But you're alone," added another voice, Mary, the 8-year-old. "So we'll have to be more creative." The plan they revealed was diabolical. Since I had no family to murder, they would drive me to seek one out. They would push me toward dating, toward remarriage, toward adoption. Anything that would give them the family structure they needed to complete their deadly cycle. "You'll meet someone," David's voice whispered from the music box. "A nice woman, maybe with children of her own. You'll invite them to move in, to share this beautiful house by the sea." And then, I understood. I was being groomed to become the next Thomas Whitmore, to find innocent victims and bring them into the antiques trap. But I had one advantage Thomas hadn't possessed. I knew what was happening before it was too late. On a foggy November morning, I loaded the antiques into my truck one final time. This time, I wasn't trying to return them or sell them. I was taking them to the one place where their curse could be permanently broken. The cliffs behind my house dropped 300 feet into the Pacific Ocean. Sharp rocks jutted from the waves below, remnants of ancient shipwrecks scattered like broken teeth. If the antiques survived the fall, they'd be claimed by the sea. Either way, they'd never trap another family. I backed the truck to the edge of the cliff and began unloading. The music box first, its lid springing open as it fell, releasing one final mournful song before the wind carried it away. The rocking horse next, tumbling end over end until it vanished into the foam below. The mirror fought back. As I lifted it from the truck, I saw the reflection of the entire Whitmore family staring back at me. Thomas was there too, his face bearing the gunshot wound that had killed him. They were screaming, reaching through the glass, trying to stop me. But their screams were silent, and their hands couldn't breach the barrier between glass and reality. The mirror shattered against the rocks below, sending fragments of cursed silver into the depths of the Pacific. Finally, the writing desk. It was the heaviest, the most difficult to move, and it fought me every inch of the way. Drawers kept sliding open, spilling papers and ink across the cliff top. The wood seemed to become heavier with each step, as if the desk was trying to root itself to the earth. When I finally pushed it over the edge, I swear I heard Margaret Whitmore scream, not in anger, but in relief. A sound of chains breaking, of souls finally set free. I watched until the last piece disappeared beneath the waves, then drove home to a house that felt genuinely empty for the first time in weeks. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in from the Pacific and the moon is dark, I hear that music box melody carried on the wind. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of children playing on the beach below, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves on stone. I don't think the Whitmore family was truly evil, just trapped, desperate to escape the cycle that had claimed them. Maybe breaking, the antiques didn't destroy them, but finally allowed them to find peace. Or maybe I just tell myself that to sleep better at night. Either way, I'm done with estate sales. Done with antique collecting, done with buying pieces of other people's lives and bringing them into my home. Because now I know that some objects carry more than just history. They carry hunger. And they're always looking for the next family to feed their endless, insatiable appetite for tragedy. The house came with a list of rules written in careful cursive on yellowed paper. 13 rules, to be exact, tucked inside the kitchen junk drawer like they were just another piece of documentation. I almost threw them away with the takeout menus and expired coupons the previous owner had left behind. I wish I had. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I bought that farmhouse in rural Indiana because I was desperate. After my divorce in Chicago, my 8-year-old son Marcus and I needed a fresh start somewhere we could afford. The 1940s farmhouse outside Bloomington was perfect. 3 bedrooms, 2 acres of land, and a price that seemed too good to be true. It was too good to be true, but not for the reasons I expected. The realtor, Mrs. Patterson, was eager to close quickly. She mentioned that the previous owner, an elderly woman named Dorothy Crane, had lived there for 60 years before passing away the previous winter. Dorothy's children lived out of state and just wanted the property sold. Lovely woman, Mrs. Patterson said. Very set in her ways, though. Had some particular ideas about how the house should be maintained. I didn't pay much attention to that comment. Every old house comes with quirks and maintenance issues. I was more concerned about the practical matters. School district for Marcus, internet for my freelance writing work, and whether the well water was safe to drink. The house was bigger than our Chicago apartment, with original hardwood floors and enough space for Marcus to run around. There was even a storm cellar in the backyard and an old well that added rustic charm to the property. It was while unpacking the kitchen that I found Dorothy's rules. The paper was old but well preserved, written in the careful penmanship of someone from a different generation. At the top, in neat capital letters, "House rules, very important. Please read carefully." The list seemed like the obsessions of an eccentric elderly woman. Never go in the backyard after sunset. Keep salt lines at all doorways. Refresh. Weekly do not look in the storm cellar. If you hear children playing at night, do not investigate. Never remove the iron horseshoe above the front door. Keep a light burning in the kitchen window from dusk to dawn. Do not dig anywhere on the property. If the well water turns red, do not drink it for 3 days. Burn sage in every room on the first day of each month. Never invite strangers into the house after dark. If you hear knocking at night, count the knocks. Never answer if it's 3 times. Keep the basement door locked at all times. If all else fails, burn the house and salt the earth. I showed the list to Marcus, and we had a good laugh about it. Looks like the previous owner was a bit superstitious, I told him. We don't need to worry about silly rules like this. That was my first mistake. Modern, educated people don't believe in supernatural nonsense. We explained away Dorothy's rules as the quirks of an isolated elderly woman who'd probably watched too many horror movies. I used the list as a conversation starter when Marcus's new friends visited, joking about our haunted farmhouse. On our 3rd night in the house, I broke rule number 1. I'd forgotten a box in the car and went outside around 9 p.m. to retrieve it. The backyard was peaceful in the moonlight, just open space stretching to the tree line, with the old well and storm cellar adding character to the landscape. But as I walked back to the house, I heard something that made me freeze, rustling in the cornfield that bordered our property. Not the normal sound of wind through stalks, but deliberate movement, like something large was walking between the rows. I peered into the darkness and saw shapes moving among the corn. Tall figures, walking in single file toward our property line. They moved wrong, too fluid, like they were gliding rather than walking. When they reached the edge of the field, they stopped. I counted at least a dozen figures, standing perfectly still, watching our house. I couldn't make out faces in the darkness, but I felt their attention like a physical weight. I hurried inside and locked the door, telling myself it was probably just neighbors, or maybe hunters. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the figures weren't entirely human. Marcus didn't sleep well that night. He kept saying he heard children playing outside his window, laughing and running around the yard. When I looked out, I saw nothing but empty space bathed in moonlight. I should have paid attention to rule number 4. Over the following weeks, I broke more rules out of modern skepticism. I removed the salt lines from the doorways because they were messy, and Marcus kept tracking salt through the house. I took down the iron horseshoe above the front door because it clashed with my decorating plans. The supernatural response was immediate and escalating. Things started moving overnight. Furniture would be rearranged. Books would be stacked in neat piles. Kitchen utensils would be organized in patterns I didn't recognize. At first, I blamed Marcus for playing pranks, but the changes were too extensive and too precise for an 8-year-old to accomplish. I broke rule number 3 on a Saturday afternoon, lifting the heavy wooden door that covered the storm cellar. The space below was larger than I expected, carved into the earth and lined with stone. The walls were covered in symbols, not carved, but burned into the stone like someone had used brands or hot irons. At the center of the cellar was a circle of salt with something dark stained in the middle. The smell that rose from the space was indescribable, like metal and flowers and something rotten underneath. I slammed the cellar door shut and spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that Dorothy had just been an eccentric artist, maybe someone who practiced harmless folk magic. But that night, Marcus Woke up screaming. I found him sitting up in bed, staring out his window with wide, terrified eyes. "Mommy," he whispered, "there are children in the yard, and they don't have faces." I looked out the window and saw them. 12 children, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, playing in our backyard. They were running in circles, playing tag, laughing with voices that sounded like wind chimes. But Marcus was right. Where their faces should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin. The faceless children played until dawn, then faded away with the morning light. I researched the property's history at the Bloomington Library. What I found made me understand why Dorothy Crane had lived by such strict rules for 60 years. The land had been the site of a witch trial in 1823. A woman named Mercy Blackwood had been accused of stealing children from nearby farms. When authorities searched her property, they found evidence of rituals, but no children, living or dead. Mercy was burned alive in what is now our backyard. But before she died, she cursed the land, promising that the children she'd claimed would never rest until they found a family to replace the one that had been taken from her. Over the next 180 years, 7 families had lived on the property. All had experienced the same phenomena. Faceless children playing at night, figures moving through the cornfield, supernatural activity that escalated until something terrible happened. The Patterson family, 1845. Parents found dead, 3 children missing. The Morrison family, 1867. House burned down with family inside. Children's bodies never recovered. The Chen family, 1923. Family vanished. Bloodstains found throughout house. Each family had lasted less than 2 years before tragedy struck. But Dorothy Crane had lived there safely for 6 decades by following the rules her grandmother had passed down. Protections developed over generations of supernatural encounters. I'd been systematically dismantling those protections, and Mercy Blackwood's curse was growing stronger. The breaking point came when Marcus began speaking in an old dialect I didn't recognize. He'd sit at his little desk in the evenings, drawing symbols that matched the ones I'd seen burned into the storm cellar walls. When I asked him about the drawings, he'd look at me with eyes that seemed too old for his 8-year-old face. "The lady in the well says I'm special," he told me one morning over breakfast. "She says I can help her find the other children who are lost." I hadn't told Marcus about the well or about Mercy Blackwood, but somehow he knew. That afternoon, I found him standing at the edge of the old well, talking to someone I couldn't see. His voice carried the careful politeness children use when speaking to adults they don't quite trust. "Yes, ma'am," he was saying. "I understand. But my mommy might be sad if I go away." I grabbed him and pulled him away from the well. But not before I glimpsed something floating in the dark water below. A face, pale and ancient, with eyes like black holes. Mercy Blackwood, still waiting after 2 centuries, still hungry for the children she'd never been able to claim in life. That night, I restored every protection Dorothy had put in place. Salt lines at every doorway, the iron horseshoe above the front door, a light burning in the kitchen window. I burned sage in every room and hung protective symbols Marcus had unknowingly been drawing. But I was too late. The damage had been done. Marcus's personality was changing. During the day, he was my normal 8-year-old son. But at night, he became someone else. He'd walk through the house with purpose, checking windows, opening doors, speaking to invisible presences in that ancient dialect. I realized Mercy wasn't Blackwood, hadn't just cursed the land. She'd been waiting for the right child, one sensitive enough to serve as a bridge between the living and the dead. Marcus was that bridge, and she was using him to weaken the barriers that kept her trapped. The faceless children appeared every night now, playing games that looked like rituals. They'd form circles in our yard, hold hands, and chant in voices that sounded like static electricity. Sometimes Marcus would stand at his bedroom window, watching and nodding like he understood what they were saying. I tried everything. Had the house blessed by 3 different priests, hired a paranormal investigator who fled after one night, even called Dorothy Crane's surviving daughter in California. Grandma Crane knew, the daughter told me over the phone. The rules weren't superstition, they were survival. She said the land was sick, that something evil had been planted there and kept growing. She spent her whole life keeping it contained. How do I protect my son? There was a long pause. Rule number 13, she finally said. It was never about the house. It was about the land itself. I understood then. The final rule wasn't just an option. It was the only permanent solution. Burn the house and salt the earth. Destroy everything and start over somewhere else. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. This was our home, our fresh start. Marcus was starting to make friends at school, and I was building a client base for my writing business. We couldn't just abandon everything and run. That decision nearly cost us both our lives. On a Tuesday night in October, I woke to find Marcus's bed empty. I searched the house, calling his name, before I heard his voice coming from outside. He was standing in the backyard with the faceless children, all of them holding hands in a circle around the old well. Marcus was chanting in that ancient dialect, and with each word he spoke, the water in the well glowed brighter. I could see Mercy Blackwood rising from the depths, her form becoming more solid, more real. "Marcus!" I screamed, running toward the circle. But I couldn't cross the line where the children stood. Some invisible barrier held me back, like trying to push through thick glass. I could only watch as my son helped resurrect a witch who'd been executed for stealing children. Mercy Blackwood emerged from the well like smoke given form. She looked exactly as she must have 2 centuries ago. A woman in her 30s, with long black hair and eyes that held the fury of someone who'd been burned alive. "Thank you, child," she said to Marcus, her voice like whispers in a tomb. "You've done so well. Now we can be together forever, just like I promised." Marcus looked confused, like he was waking up from a dream. "I want my mommy," he said in his normal 8-year-old voice. Mercy smiled, and her teeth were black with centuries of decay. "Your mommy can come too. We'll be one big family, down in the dark, where no one can hurt us ever again." That's when I remembered rule number 13. I ran to the house, grabbed the emergency gasoline I kept for the generator, and began dousing everything I could reach. The front porch, the kitchen, the living room where we'd laughed about Dorothy's silly rules. "If all else fails, burn the house and salt the earth," Mercy Blackwood shrieked when she realized what I was doing. The faceless children scattered like smoke, and Marcus collapsed to his knees as whatever had been controlling him suddenly let go. I lit the match just as Mercy reached the front porch. The house went up like it had been soaked in accelerant. Flames spread faster than should have been possible, consuming 60 years of Dorothy Crane's careful protections in minutes. But as the fire grew, I could see Mercy Blackwood becoming less solid, more transparent. The fire was destroying more than just wood and furniture. It was burning away the supernatural infection that had been growing in that soil for 2 centuries. Marcus and I stood in the driveway, watching our fresh start turn to ash and smoke. But for the first time since we'd moved in, my son looked at me with normal 8-year-old eyes. "I'm sorry, Mommy," he whispered. "I didn't mean to talk to the scary lady." We drove to a motel in town and never looked back. The insurance company ruled it an electrical fire. Old wiring, they said, though the house had been rewired just 5 years earlier. I used the payout to relocate to Colorado, where Marcus and I started over, in a normal suburban house with normal neighbors and no mysterious rules to follow. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I smell smoke. Sometimes I catch Marcus staring out windows like he's looking for someone. And sometimes I wonder if Mercy Blackwood found another way to follow us, if burning the house was enough to break a curse that had been growing for 2 centuries. I've started keeping salt by every door again, just in case. Because I learned something important in that farmhouse in Indiana. Some rules aren't made to be broken. Some warnings come from people who've spent their entire lives fighting battles we can't see. And sometimes, the only way to win is to admit defeat and burn everything down. Dorothy Crane protected that house and everyone in it for 60 years by following 13 simple rules. I ignored her wisdom and nearly lost my son to a witch who'd been waiting 2 centuries for the right child to steal. Now, I have my own rule. One I'll never break. If someone who's lived through hell gives you advice on how to survive, you listen, even if it sounds crazy, even if it seems impossible, especially then. These 7 stories represent real experiences from people who've reached out to share their moving day nightmares. Some details have been changed to protect identities, but the core experiences remain true to what was reported. If you've experienced something similar, you're not alone. And if you're planning a move, maybe think twice about that house that seems too good to be true. Thanks for listening to these tales from the dark side of American life. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for the next family to welcome them home.